Hello and welcome. My name is Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all of the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to talk about something I saw on Raycon 22. It's about the 1959 Papua New Guinea famous aerial anomaly. Between 1958 and 1959, Papua New Guinea, then an Australian-administered territory, found itself in the midst of a UFO wave. A wide variety of glowing lights and disc-shaped objects were reported, with peak of activity occurring in June of 1959. Undoubtedly, the most spectacular sighting took place near an Anglican mission station in the village of Banai on the north coast. Over the consecutive nights of the 26th and the 27th of that month, the events were documented by a priest named Reverend William B. Gill, who was based at the mission station on June the 26th, 1959 at 6:45 p.m. Now, this is taken from Reverend Gill's account directly. He initially noticed a bright white light in the northwestern sky. The light approached the mission station, then began hovering stationary at approximately 300 feet above parishioners and staff, which totaled about 38 people, including Gill. They all gathered to watch the UFO that appeared as a large disc-shaped object with a wide base and narrow upper deck. The object appeared to have 4 legs on its underside and 5 glowing portholes of panels on its side. On a number of occasions, the object produced a shaft of blue light that shone upwards at an approximate angle of 45 degrees into the sky for short periods of time. What looked like ordinary men appeared out of the object onto the upper deck. There were 4 men in total, at times only 1 or 2, then 3 and 4. The shaft of blue light disappeared along with the men, and the object departed as it moved through some clouds. This 25-minute event was followed by other minor UFO sightings during the night. However, the best was saved for the following night. On June the 27th of that year, 1959, at 6 p.m., a group gathered on the beach to watch the same object, or another just like it, that had returned to approximately the same position as the night before. Reverend Gill was in no doubt that the dark silhouettes of the 4 figures who had again appeared on the upper deck were human. 2 of the figures near the center of the deck occasionally bent over and raised their arms as though adjusting or setting up something that was not visible to the naked eye. Reverend Gill soon noticed that one of the figures seemed to be looking down at the group on the beach, and in an attempt to attract their attention, he spontaneously stretched his arm above his head and waved. To his astonishment, the figure did the same. Encouraged by the response, Gill and another of the group now waved both arms over their heads. The group gasped in awe as 3 of the figures now waved back, followed by the 4th shortly afterward. With evening beginning to set in, the group retrieved a flashlight, which they used to direct a series of long dashes towards the UFO. The object responded by making several wavering motions back and forth. The group continued to communicate with further flashes and waving, and the object appeared to descend slowly towards the beach. The group called out to the figures and beckoned them to land. However, after a short period, the object moved no further. The figures apparently lost interest and disappeared below deck. After a short period, 2 of the figures reappeared and carried on with whatever they were doing before the interruption. This time, accompanied by the blue spotlight, the scene remained unchanged, and so the group on the beach decided to go to dinner. And critics would later question this action, stating that why would someone walk away from such an extraordinary sight? Reverend Gill responded that having had about 4 hours of this on Friday night, they were not nearly as interested when it returned on Saturday night, especially after they were unable to persuade it to land. And I thought this was interesting. Reverend Gill stated that there was nothing eerie or otherworldly about this. He said that it was all so ordinary as a Ford car. In fact, it looked to be a perfectly normal sort of object. An Earth-made object, in fact. He said that he realized, of course, that some people might think of this as a flying saucer, but he took it to be some kind of hovercraft the Americans or even the Australians had built. The figures inside looked perfectly human also. In fact, he thought they were human, and that if they got them to land, they would probably find the pilots to be ordinary Earthmen in military uniforms. Okay, so around the time that Reverend Gill spotted this UFO with these very human-like occupants in this craft, there was a lot of tension between the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Union had just created an ICBM nuclear warhead with the capability of reaching the continental United States. So there was a flurry of activity in the Pacific missile range to find a solution to knock down these ICBMs before they were capable of reaching the United States. Could this UFO incident be evidence of early testing with laser-directed weaponry to possibly knock down these ICBMs? On the 21st of August, 1957, there was a successful test launch of the Soviet Union's R-7, the world's first intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. It was designed to deliver a nuclear warhead to American soil. The missile flew an incredible 3,700 miles and marked a perilous turning point in the Cold War. Now, faced with a potential nuclear missile attack, the United States raced to find a defensive solution to this new threat. In response to this dilemma, the Department of Defense turned to the recently created Advanced Research Project Agency, or ARPA for short, and immediately tasked them with finding new defensive solutions to the Soviet ICBM threat. TRG approached ARPA in December of 1950 in the hopes of securing funding for their laser development project. And excited by the proposal, ARPA responded by providing far more funding than was requested. By April of 1959, ARPA and the United States Department of Defense had classified the TRG laser project secret. Whatever TRG was doing, the Department of Defense deemed it important enough to hide it from the public. It's also interesting that during their meeting to secure funding with ARPA, TRG stated that their laser would be able to knock attacking missiles out of the sky. So if anti-Soviet ICBM testing was actually conducted in the Pacific Missile Range, what Reverend Gill witnessed could have possibly been early testing by ARPA. Then I saw on Weird World that there was a weird explosion that Reverend Gill and the others experienced on the last night. This could very well have been a test ballistic missile being destroyed during the alleged ARPA tests. So at 7 p.m., the main UFO was still present, although it appeared somewhat smaller. The group of observers went to church, and after the service, visibility was very limited, with the sky covered in clouds. Nothing else was seen that evening. However, at 10:40 p.m., a very penetrating, ear-splitting explosion woke up people on the station. It sounded like it had come from just outside the window of the mission house. Reverend Gill felt it did not sound like a thunderclap. Nothing had been seen, but the whole sky was overcast. Reverend Gill documented his experience, and copies of his report were distributed to all the members of the House of Representatives of Australia's federal parliament. not unlike what's happening now with the UAP hearings here in the United States. The minister's reply avoided the question, instead indicating that most sightings of UFOs were explained. So same old, 60 odd years later, and we're still in the same situation here in the United States. The Royal Australian Air Force finally interviewed Reverend Gill on December the 29th of 1959, 6 months after the sighting. Gill's recollection was that two officers talked to him about stars and planets and then left. Nothing else. He heard no more from them. The senior interviewing officer concluded that the incidents could have been nothing more than natural phenomenon colored by past events and subconscious influences, suggesting that some of the lights observed were the planets Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. Then in 1973, the famous Dr. Alan Hynek, the renowned UFO researcher, visited Australia and Papua New Guinea and found 6 of the witnesses to the incident. They all supported Reverend Gill's version of what had happened. Hynek concluded that while the lesser UFOs seen by Gill were attributable to bright stars and planets, the primary object's size and absence of movement over 3 hours ruled out an astronomical explanation given by the Australian Air Force. So the 1959 Papua New Guinea UFO sighting is regarded and still stands today as one of the best and most credible UFO sightings, which occurred in a remote territory of what back then was part of Australia. 38 witnesses, including priests, teachers, and medical technicians, observed what was either human or extraterrestrial, but definitely something that defied conventional explanation. Thank you. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.